Welcome today. We're glad you could join us, and we're looking forward today to talk about sustainability. And so today we're going to talk about, so I'm going to get this slide to move. Today we're going to talk about sustainability and renewability. Okay? But what the heck is this all about? Today our speaker is Ron Cormier. He manages Rock Bottom Enterprises, tenured consultant based in Mexico, covering global aspects, emphasizing North America industry participation. 40 years experience, plus a collegiate network of experts having deep relations in global upstream, midstream, downstream oil and gas markets, as well as fuels, petrochemicals, and derivatives. I was fortunate to work with Ron previously. He's very experienced, and he's also a great guy. Rock Bottom Enterprises provides clients with a concise view of the market players, analysis, expert witness, previous outcomes, direction, project guidance. Involvements resulted in highly efficient outcomes, proves assurance of your firm's value, add guidance, profitability, and long-term success. Rely on Ron when the experience matters. International Association of Certified Practicing Engineers. We started this in 2014. It is a great organization that helps academics, practical engineers, and those striving to increase their knowledge and boost their career. The goal is to build an organization with validated candidates' engineering fundamentals, improve their individual skills, and enhance their networking ability. You need to get certified today. So we have some very good programs. We have a certified practicing engineer. We have a commissioning program. We have a project management program. We have some very good programs. 2014, we started the association. We're in our 9th year. We have over 2,000 members. Knowledge, provide globally renowned training modules, certification, provide study questions and tests for each guideline to ensure proficiency, followed with a certificate and a title. Networking, there's already a large group of industry leaders who recognize the value of the certification. You're to be granted opportunities in the future from your IACPE certification. 2015, we started a magazine for IACP called Engineering Practice. We're now in our 8th year. In January, we had over 50,000 readers. And so we're honored and pleased with the reception of the magazine. And so thanks to our great authors, Ron writes for us every 2 months. And we have other great authors that write for us. And we're really honored to get 50,000 readers per issues. Ron, why don't you jump in here?
Super, Carl. Thanks for having me on today. It's a fun to do to help promote EPM, and certainly it's process excellence in the petroleum, gas, liquids, and petchem industry. But one of the things I think we want to try to do with the magazine going forward is to participate in the behaviors that have served us so well in the past with the industry. And how we phase those towards a closed circular loop to work on a cleaner planet as we go. I think we've all been at this enough years now where it's just not acceptable any longer to do it any other way. So also look to EPM going forward that we highlight that responsible leadership. We hope that we can improve your understanding of global climate and water and soil issues and the challenges that come with it. But also a long-term view for mentoring the process and how you and your own companies can work to enhance corporate behavior, just strategic direction, the ideologies of your leadership groups. And ultimately, the bottom line here is that we improve life on Earth for all of us going forward and successive generations. But please let us know your feedback, especially after the pitch today. If there's questions, certainly Carl and I are always available, and we hope your journey stays on track.
Next
flip. Yep. So today we'd like to talk about renewability and sustainability. But before we do, I think we throw around a lot of nomenclature these days as to what these titles mean, but we don't really drill down to get a good understanding of what we're saying. and the associated processes that are coupled with what we should be doing in the future going forward. I think it's safe to say that at this point, much of the Earth's population acknowledges that we need to do something at this point towards improvement of our behaviors and methods. The outcome is if we don't, we might be extinct, and that's not a good thing. So we'll take the tact that there is an issue with climate change, and we can do our part as the industry to help improve it through our behaviors and methods. So what's going on today? There's lots of descriptions, ideas, actual progress, but a lot of hand waving and head scratching towards ultimately getting our arms around what methodologies mean real action in this arena. So that's what we'll talk about a little bit today, but specific to our industries, our being oil, gas, fuel liquids, fuels, petchems, and derivatives. So the aim, hopefully, is to sort out what renewable and sustainable labels really mean. And if you'll bear with us a little bit today, I think we'll walk through some of that towards a more livable planet. Next slide. So let's walk through the glossary a little bit first. What does renewable energy mean? Well, re and new literally mean to make new again. The idea here is that these energy sources are naturally replenished over time. That is, hydrocarbons made up of old dinosaurs that have degraded in the soil over millions of years, or in the case of UV, naturally recycling polymers that are specifically engineered to be circular in the environment. Just a couple of examples there. But as for renewable energy, we have a fixed quantity of it. There's our rate of use exceeds the rate of renewal. And that is something we obviously away from, but when we're using it faster than we're making it, we also take on the title of being unsustainable. So that is the difference between the two, and we'll drill down on that in a couple more slides. But generally keep it in mind for the purposes of this talk that renewable energy means electrons from solar, wind, hydropower, tidal, or geothermal. Next slide. So again, renewable energy are sources that take a very long time to be created. Again, old dinosaurs under the soil, vis-a-vis fossil fuels. Their creation happened a long time ago. They're not likely to happen again. Example would be uranium as well as hydrocarbons. But bottom line is primary energy flows are almost always renewable. On the other hand, things like biofuels are renewable and definitely count as fuels. Next slide. But they're in so much as their energy consumption can last for the foreseeable future. But practices rely on resources which can continue to supply our needs. So when we talk about renewable, keep in mind that it's all dependent on the rate of use. So if we keep use in moderation, and moderation is a broad term, again, it could be determined to be sustainable, but I think we all know that we're using power from fossil fuels at a rate greater than replenishment. Next slide. Sustainability of fuels also means that the environment is not significantly damaged due to the effects of using energy from sustainable sources. There's all kinds of opinions on what is sustainable in terms of energy sources and what is not. Obviously, at some point when you make major changes to the fueling of global economies, politics get involved. Governments usually have to subsidize behavior in a new direction. Again, that brings up all sorts of government issues and what certain parts of populations feel is the right direction, and the remainder who feel they'd like to go in a different direction. But for most people, sustainability means that the environment is not significantly damaged due to the accumulated effects of burning energy and using energy in this manner over time. You might think that coal, oil, natural gas might be sustainable because our reserves are large. And maybe that's in some people's mind enough to stop there and continue doing what they've been doing for years. But we can't we can't preclude including the closed cycle use of these power sources, which means they emit things into our environment by expending the BTUs from them. That is the crux of the problem, and we'd like to work on over time. Maybe it's not a widely known figure, but this practice of harvesting hydrocarbon fuels and making of petrochemicals, etc., durable goods in our environment require about 30% of the planet's carrying capacity, not including the emissions and handling effects. That means that we're putting a good deal of the Earth's resources at work to fuel our needs in this area, which may not be healthy environmentally over time. Hopefully we're making advancements, at least directionally these days, that favor an environmentally friendly arena, but not so far primarily renewable. Sustainable efforts should change the narrative for bona fide improvements. Emissions intensity is our primary concern here. Again, we mentioned that a couple of times. But going forward, not only is renewability, but sustainability via technical advancements going to be the key to our success. So what's happening out there these days? We mentioned that, for major change to occur, most times national governments need to get involved with curbing behaviors, changing behaviors, etc. There needs to be some change artistry that happens for most of the populations around the planet to do something different in terms of the durable goods that we use in our homes and how we get around from a transportation point of view with fuels. So in 2015, the Paris Accord met with the major nations around the world who support climate change. And sustainability was a well-received issue. Obviously, everyone there wants this type of behavior to happen and change to follow. But the bottom line was that a commitment towards raising the Earth's temperature no more than 2 degrees Celsius was the popular to do, although there's a lot of reluctance to get there. Oil and petrochemical, of course, as an industry, needs a strong commitment to help with that. The challenge is big, but I think the key to this is baby steps. So what we don't want to do, or what we want to try to incent behavior-wise, is continuing conventional methods as we've done in the past. That simply won't get it. That simply continues the propaganda, and I think as an industry, we need to show bona fide change and actual improvement from our direction forward. So what is it we got to do? We need to achieve the warming goal. What are nations doing around the world? Well, sustainable and renewable energy sources are likely the only viable option. Possibly there's quantum leaps in technology that we don't know about. Nuclear certainly has made strides in fusion lately versus the old fission methodologies. But in general, a switch from fossil fuels for BTUs, fuels, chemicals, need to think about movement over to renewable sources where it can happen, such that we consider these processes as circular. That's another word for your glossary, but circular in terms of closing the loop with emissions into our air and water and back to resources that can be recycled, repurposed, reused. But again, let's do it in a controlled manner. It's key that we add planning and portfolio management and do this strategically so that nations, corporations, value chains around the earth don't lose significant market share in implementing these changes. We mentioned a little bit about recycling, reusing, repurposing. Renewable and clean methodologies emphasize the key to this circularity, as it were. Again, raw materials should be renewable, an extract, or a byproduct of another industry. In many cases, we're recycling motor oil these days from our automobiles for use in either diesel-powered automobiles, reuse as base oils, or as feedstocks for gasoline, so that we stretch our barrels where we are still using hydrocarbon fuels. So far, though, this means, in our vernacular, again, operational improvements towards decarbonization. The technology will help us here. The Internet of Things, as many of you know about, is a term, and digital oil fields. There are all kinds of software technologies right now that offer better control and elimination of the waste coming from these arenas. Again, those cause excess issues for our environment and our water where we don't control or look for waste in those streams. For startups, I can tell you I've been party to a couple of these lately, and VC funding and mezzanine, family offices, etc. They prefer to be innovative, and they want to see in pitch books and business suppositions consideration of the environment as a key part of the value statement. So we really need to embrace these new principles and processes. The UN's got 17 sustainable development goals that they would like to see employed. They are in close lockstep with the Paris Agreement from the 2015 gathering. So let's continue to analyze. So 4 steps to a sustainable future. Accenture and Microsoft looked at methodologies towards the actual tactics of the strategy and what it is we tangibly do in our workplaces towards efficiencies and improvements for renewability and sustainability. Suffice to say that we're migrating limited on-premise services to cloud and hybrid services and to hyperscale versions that yield carbon and energy efficiency improvements. We want to minimize the environmental footprint of our operation systems, processes, and the step change here is advanced technology. That enables our autonomous operations to continually max out our systems and manufacturing efficiencies with minimized waste. That's a hard thing to do with human control, and technology, again, makes the difference here. There's a greater transparency and accountability through the value chain with technology on our side, all the way from raw materials through to product creation and distribution as well. You can't hide in the woodwork with technology. So towards government intervention and support for sustainability, again, that's a little bit of a bad taste on many people's tongues around the world, but for significant step change to happen behaviorally, these efforts need to be part of crawling, walking, and running towards our improvement. Where are these efforts happening around the world? Activities are more accelerated in Northwest Europe and Asia. Northwest Europe is directly tied to a fungible carbon tax. So conversion use actually costs money. The thought is that would be around $50 per ton emitted, and that number has gone up above that these days. But over time, we expect that that is a tangible cost of conversion. So are there cheaper ways, as it were, to achieve lower emissions and a better environment? Japan and South Korea have committed to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. China wants to do it by 2030 and be carbon neutral by 2050. Indonesia has mentioned working with firms to reduce nearly 30% of their emissions by 2030. In the good old USA, well, we've lost 5 years of federal goal setting between the 2015 Paris Accord and 2021 with the regime change. The opt-out was to stay out of the Paris Agreement during those years, but with the regime change, we're now making up for that lost time. So suffice to say that clean technology is here to stay. As we mentioned a bit earlier, investors are quite picky. Projects with poor sustainability controls and procedures and operations are simply not being funded, or they're much harder to be funded. I think the issue is that they're simply no longer acceptable from a perception point of view in the marketplace. But improvement is only achieved if we improve our understanding of the starting environmental footprint and the value chain of emissions, direct and indirect, emissions from energy to electricity, but building, construction, transport, all the ancillary pieces of that initial energy conversion and value chain have to be considered. In the oil business, we sort of label that well to wheel, or from the well to Walmart, as it were, what actually gets emitted into the environment in the course of that value chain and product that we so value in our lives. Well, the market's crowded with new ideas and tech advancements, luckily, and again, funding favors these. So some actual efforts going on in the marketplace that tangibly prove that concept. Just a few. Covestro and Dow certainly are instrumental and have been making tangible process in fostering post-primary use of recycling, the so-called green or closed loop movements that you hear about in the marketplace. That is a huge about face versus the past. For many years, the big materials companies felt like it was their job to make materials and somebody else's job to close the usability chain towards the environment. Again, stockholders won't allow that anymore. Investors won't allow that anymore. And so you see these strategic directional changes happening from the big material companies. BASF is doubling its synthetic ester base stocks production with decreased cost and without increase to emissions and biodegradability. So you can clean up the environment and still add value, or said the other way, not lose value in your businesses with sound planning and thinking. Sabic and Kraton are making a renewable butadiene feedstock. The new material reduces carbon emissions by about 4 kilograms for every kilogram produced. The feeds are free of palm oil and animal products as well, so positive improvement in that arena. But others that are participating, Unilever, Danone, and Coca-Cola, are committed to use less packaging in their value chains. Certainly, it's the products we use on the inside of packaging that matter to us, but we don't want to discount the carrier that brought those wonderful things to our life. And that's, again, part of the message this morning. Starting at the beginning of the chain, certainly large energy companies are pivoting their investments towards producing of renewables. Shell, BP, Kazakhstan, they're actioning depreciation and divestments of wasteful assets. Now, some of you may raise your eyebrows a bit here. Certainly, Shell has, for one, been selling refineries of late. The issue is they are simply changing names at the top of the banner, those assets are still running. And so a lot of work needs to be done to shut down wasteful assets in general, no matter who owns them. But again, that's part of the business collaboration towards recycling and sustainable solutions that benefit improved brand recognition. These folks can certainly add to profitability by the new industry that is supporting renewability and sustainability. The market likes that. Funding and support follow. But again, generally, there's a languishing toleration for the business premise that does not consider energy efficiency, CO2 emissions, lighter feedstocks, etc. So from here, assume that sustainability is the next 100 years, as it were. I think governments would like to have that happen in the next 20 years, but it's crawling and walking and running in this direction. We won't go back. So in a nutshell then, the oil, gas, petrochemical sector faces ongoing environmental changes. Compliance reforms are far from new and novel for this business, especially since the EPA's production in the U.S. and the West in 1970. This has been a way of life. We don't assume that we can go forth without government compliance, and so this is the fundamental of any growth plan that generationally, most of us who have been at this for approaching 40 plus years just wake up and assume every day. So there's an ever-present, continuous improvement direction it's been around certainly since the 70s and 80s that we live with. If we get to 2050, the IEA's goal certainly is to have air and pollutants from fuel and chemicals production decreased by some 90%. So we need to get on with our efforts. The contributions in this arena will depend on industries, again, starting with their corporate psychology, their ideologies, what they recognize as profitable value chains. And again, it has to start from the top down in these organizations. And there has to be a realization that there are career opportunities for their professional staff, as well as value chain profitability for their shareholders. A number of factors will have high impacts on future results and the rate that we get to success. As we've all seen in the near term, supply chain disruptions can happen, which shake our world for two or three years after the effect. Certainly COVID has caused a shutdown in the environment of consumption and production largely, as we knew it before COVID. Once we shake the economy for 2 years after that, we're now toying with high inflation and recessionary environments. But these shocks will move out of the curve. We need to not lose sight of the long term. We need to make sure political and social problems don't slow us down. Right now, again, COVID, inflation, the Russia-Ukraine crisis, these are all having major shocks on our energy chain, and it makes it a little tough to change away from what we call the past, because the current is a little bit hard to predict right now. But bottom line, delays may occur. The certainty of change is visible. Barriers are eroding. There is a passion in general for a cleaner world, and that's taken hold in upcoming generational demographics. The thing to remember here is young folks, those born after 2000, are really dovish about progress that does not include significant action to change or clean up the environment and the planet. They have to live here longer than we do, and it's imperative to the way they think. So hopefully that gave a little bit of a understanding this morning of what we're calling renewability and sustainability, how we go forth and improve our behaviors and methods, procedures, et cetera, in the oil and gas, petrochemical, midstream business. And with that, Carl, I suppose we'll entertain a few questions and answers.
Thanks, Ron, for a great presentation today. And so I've got just a few questions that we generated along the way. We want to try to get you the answer. So, electrical vehicles, how sustainable are renewable or electric vehicles? What are your thoughts on electric vehicles?
Well, first of all, Carl, there's lots of thoughts on electric vehicles and whether they are a true solution to um, a better alternative than fossil fuels and the emissions that they create. I think in and of the um, entity itself, vis-a-vis driving an electrical car, is the right answer versus burning tailpipe emissions out the back end of an internal combustion vehicle. But really, you need to look behind the vehicle itself and the chain. How does it get its electrical charge to begin with? If it's solar, wind, nuclear, tidal, or geothermal, as we've spoken a bit earlier on, I think the premise becomes very sound. It's a matter of how we get the electricity to the vehicle. But long term, it seems to be a much better alternative than gasoline consuming engines for personal transportation as we go forward in the future.
Okay. So how do we deal with the future battery disposal issues from these electric vehicles?
Well, I think the recyclability of batteries and materials are a key area that, as we mentioned earlier, provides a lot of opportunity for up and coming professionals in this arena. It's certainly a business that in large part does not exist today. So the premise of how we do that and how we collect batteries and battery materials back for, again, recyclability, repurposing, reuse is the key. For smaller batteries, non-vehicle batteries, the model tends to support a surcharge on the battery core. So let's say for a starting battery under the hood of a vehicle, let's say, there's a $20 surcharge on that core today. So if you go in and buy a new battery to start your vehicle, an ICE vehicle, it's sort of like the old soda bottle return model. They collect a fee up front that incents you to bring the battery core back when you need a new one.
I know.
As for the future,
$20 motivates me to bring them back.
that's for sure.
Yeah.
As for a battery that's the size of your vehicle, I think some sort of encouragement to keep those batteries from being junked will need to happen. I think people, will pay a lot of money for the vehicle battery that charges their electric car. I don't think that's something that gets scrapped to a junkyard without some thought. But again, the idea is to curb that from happening. And so avenues and methods of getting that battery back in, if it's, to the dealer or a third party that will allow for that cleanup, as it were, and repurposing, reuse of the materials or the battery itself to happen.
Okay. What types of emissions do we consider safe?
Well, if we're talking about from our vehicle, that's pretty much water vapor. Whether we use electric cars or fuel cells or hydrogen fuel cells, those kinds of things that are being explored and improved today, pretty much we want to be able to breathe what comes off a vehicle. And if that's no emissions in the case of an electric or water vapor in the case of hydrogen, those are certainly acceptable, but nothing containing carbon.
Okay. If we move towards solar, nuclear, wind, and tidal, geothermal, do we still need fossil fuels?
Well, the drill down to this question, as far as an answer, in my thinking is it's a phase out and phase in issue, and not to be considered as a snapshot in time. As you noted earlier, as we noted earlier, the various nationalities around the world and corporate entities around the world have set 2030, 2040, 2050 kinds of phase out and phase in towards renewable and sustainable goals. So I think the idea here is to realize that none of this is step change that can happen overnight. With that as the bottom line and the backdrop, yes, we still need fossil fuels, probably out until 2040, 2050. Back during my time with Wood Mackenzie, we used to use a figure of around 40 to 60% still fired by internal combustion as it concerns over the road travel versus new methods of transport. But suffice to say that by the end of the century, I think internal combustion and gasoline using engines, diesel using engines will be a thing of the past.
Okay. Petrochemical production is still a reaction of hydrocarbons, and hence byproducts are emitted accordingly. Is this pollution, and what can we do to make petrochemicals?
Yeah, I think this is the dodge, as it were, that the petchem industry needs to stay away from. Early on, I think there was some fright when it came to step change for the business, because inherently this is a hydrocarbon reacting, hydrocarbon cleaving, hydrocarbon recombination business, and certainly there are emissions from those processes. I think there's two things that the petchem industry will do going forward, and that is use of alternative, more renewable feedstocks into these processes, first of all, and secondly, the collection of non-on-purpose byproducts that we prefer not be made, though Mother Nature dictates that they do. So again, this is part of the improvement process. We can get into examples of this if as need be, but that's kind of the long and the short of it. Start with cleaner materials, less intense BTUs, and collect the things that you don't want to happen on purpose from a constituent's point of view.
Very good. Most of the future pollution will come from developing countries. How to help them develop while also reducing the future pollution. So there's a lot of developing countries that are going to need to learn, are going to need to develop energy, but we want it to be clean energy. How are we going to do this?
Yeah, I think certainly third world and developing countries have one huge benefit in so much as they haven't put in a lot of time in the wrong direction, as it were. So certainly their subsidization and support in different directions that do not accentuate burning gasoline will be the key. Also, the eastern part of the planet has a declining demographic. Their world is getting much older. And so up and coming new generations, I think, are more encouraged, they're more motivated to work in a direction of a cleaner world. So that helps. I mean, the citizenry's mindset, ideology, what they call important, is certainly driven by younger folks coming up that have to live on the planet longer. We'll get into some thinking, I think, on subsidization in a minute, but part of that needs to come from governmental agencies, national leading agencies that right now subsidize certain directions of energy use, and it'll be a matter of improved directions where they put their money towards the encouragement of a cleaner value chain as it comes to burning fuels in those societies.
CO2 recovery will increase the cost of electricity, but the public does not seem to be in favor of paying the extra costs. And in the developing countries, they cannot pay the extra costs. How's the best way to overcome this hurdle?
Well, number one way is not to make CO2 to begin with. And we touched on this a little bit earlier with hydrogen transport fuels, electric vehicle as transport methodologies. So if we don't make it, that helps the question become moot in a hurry. But I think CO2 recovery from internal combustion and fossil fuels needs to happen and will happen and is happening. As an example, Occidental Petroleum here in the West is putting a great deal of strategic effort into CO2 collection out in the Permian Basin area using deep well mitigation methods to, where there were once crude oil reserves underground. So your question was about the extra cost of it. I don't think there's any way around it in time. We'll simply cover the cost of the new technology, but I think, again, those value chains will also bring opportunity for new businesses in them and people's sustenance in terms of professional careers in them. So let it work, I would say. Again, we're in the early stages. We're crawling, walking, and running. But we do and will either not make CO2 more so in the future, or during that phase down period we talked about from present internal combustion transport to other methods. I think we have to recover CO2. There are ways to make it happen. Early on, there's some cost to doing that. Whether or not governments will help with that versus private money remains to be seen. But it's happening and will happen and will find its way into the chain. And I think the value of that may cost us a little early on, but in the long term, it's about the planet surviving, and there's no substitute for that part.
Many third world countries have nationalized the energy companies, which have lowered the inner costs. So there's many of the third world countries have nationalized companies that have lower energy costs than the first world countries. Some countries, gasoline is less than half the cost of, say, the USA. How can we reduce pollution and global warming with subsidized gasoline?
Yeah, it's a little bit the same concept as we touched on a couple of questions ago, but especially in those developing parts of the world where the government and national leadership is subsidizing energy use today. The old fossil fuel methodology, that is. Take, for example, South America, subcontinent India, Southeast Asia. Those arenas have their fuels subsidized. So in one way, it's quite a positive benefit that those industries stand with government subsidies. I think it'll be a matter of switching those subsidies towards cleaner burning fuel chains versus internal combustion. That may hurt a little bit in the short term when Joe Driver pulls up to the pump to fill up his gasoline consuming car. But over time, the subsidies are about whether he'll see a cheaper vehicle purchased with an electric or hydrogen burning vehicle, and certainly the lower cost of using that vehicle over the road during the life of the vehicle. There's a way to do this, and actually in those areas where subsidies are happening, it's a matter of switching subsidies towards cleaner burning fuels. Again, none of this change is a snapshot in time, and there may be a little short-term pain for longer-term gain. So that's simply the long and the short of that.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for your thoughts today. It's been very informative, and we look forward to your articles continuing in Engineering Practice Magazine, and we hope to have another sharing in the future like this. Thanks for your time.
Super, Carl. Thanks for having me, and it's a blast to contribute to Engineering Practice Magazine and IACPE. I think the process and project prowess of the magazine and its contributing editors and yourself are, without question. So it's nice to kind of add some of the societal and commercial effects that are going on in the world and our business from those efforts. And we'll continue to do that in the magazine. So hopefully the readers continue to keep an eye on that part of what we do. And if there's questions, I hope they bring them to us.
All right. Yeah, if you got any questions, you can email us, and we appreciate your time today. Thanks.